So, an admiral is touring the Enterprise, and he stops by Chekhov, and he's going to test him out, see if he's good at, if he's got what it takes to be a Starfleet officer. So the admiral says, "What would you do if the weapons officer suddenly got his head blown off?" Chekhov says, "Nothing, sir." "Why wouldn't you do anything?" "Because I am the weapons officer, sir." Welcome to the Final Frontier, the Star Trek fan film podcast, a Trexsphere production, brought to you by Slurm Cola. No, Sluggo Cola.
Sluggo Cola, yeah.
Let me get the right franchise down. Brought to you by Sluggo Cola. Introducing our guest, our host, our Legionnaire extraordinaire, the guy who's going to be the special guest star in the next Avengers movie, Adam Mullen.
Hello, hello.
Ladies and gentlemen, our guest of honor and the reason we're here today, David MacDowell Blue.
Hello.
And
Welcome,
I am
David. Oh, sorry, Bill.
Yeah, sorry, there's still me. By the way, I'm Bill. I'm the guy in the red shirt. Pay no attention to me.
Well, thank you, David, for being with us today. I know it's a little early for us on the West Coast, 7 a.m. And it just so happens to be September 8th, 2018 is the 52nd anniversary of Star Trek.
This would be a good year to get a commemorative deck of cards.
There you go.
Good point. Yeah.
News. Do we have any news?
Well, besides it being the anniversary, there was recently a picture of Patrick Stewart with most of the cast of TNG. It looks like at dinner. And everyone's speculating what they were talking about, if it had to do with the new Picard series or whatever. What do we think about that?
We think it's good. I'm liking the other stuff. They're also saying that they're going to have more than one new series to get up and running, so it's going to be Trek year-round.
Yeah. David, what do you think?
I think the photograph itself looks like a bunch of people just hanging around.
Yeah.
I have no idea what I'm looking forward to seeing what, post-Nemesis series would be about.
Mm-hmm.
Because I always liked the character of Picard. And I'm looking forward to seeing what it turns out to be. And that's pretty much it. That's I'm not hung up on speculating about everything and every little. I mean, my lord. I mean, I've been in different fandoms long enough to know fans will take the tiniest little detail and spin it into the most elaborate labyrinth new universes if you give them a chance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
So,
I've done that once or twice today.
Yeah.
But, yeah. I will say, as far as speculation goes, I'm not going to speculate about what it'll be because I'll get it wrong. I would love to see them do a crazy Picard. Like we saw in the big series finale, he did have a little bit of that senility going on, and I think part of that was Q messing with him. And when you think about everything he's gone through over the 10 or 12 years we saw him going through stuff, the guy's brain has got to be Swiss cheesed. Mind melding with a crazy Vulcan, torture from Cardassians, Ferengi mind control probes, being taken over by how many energy-based or gaseous-based alien life forms, downloading
living an entire lifetime on another planet, being assimilated by the Borg.
Yeah. How is he? I mean, he should be a vegetable. He should have been a vegetable by season 3. So, and when you hear Patrick Stewart talk, he says they're going to do new and interesting things. And this is a guy that grew up playing, King Lear, and he's done the great classics of Shakespeare. I think he wants to play around with being crazy. And just have a situation where it's like that episode with Riker, only it's good, where there's a real threat, and he's the only one who sees it. But everybody thinks he's crazy, only he's not crazy. But he is crazy.
Yeah, that would be interesting. So
Don
the next
Quixote Picard.
What was that?
Don Quixote Picard.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the other piece of news is, at least that I can think of, is Chris Pine wants to do the next Star Trek movie, for sure. Will this happen, though? We don't know because of the salary dispute. What do we think?
I could have told you that was going to happen because it's like David was saying earlier about fans taking the tiniest little thing and spinning elaborate theories from it. A few years back, when they were making the third of the new Trek films, they signed a big deal with Zachary Quinto and Chris Pine saying, we're going to pay you this much now, and then we'll pay you a whole bunch more when we make the fourth one. And then when they go to shoot the fourth one, they're like, well, we're trying to cut back on the budget. We want to pay you less than what we said. And he's like, no, forget you. And this is still, I mean, they're like, what, a year from even starting filming? So it's not like this is, you know, they were going to start shooting tomorrow, so the film is scrapped. But it's like David was saying, there are fans who will take the tiniest little kernel of something and create this tapestry of fake news. And everybody was like, oh, it's canceled. But that's mostly, you hear that from people who just really hated the new movies and want it to be canceled.
Yeah.
So
then they're the ones who are blaming Discovery.
Yeah, and it's like, and so, I mean, I don't even think of this as a news thing because it's pretty much what we expected to happen. I would be interested to see if they're going to be able to get Chris Hemsworth back because, you know, all due respect to Mr. Pine, he's not Thor. I mean, Chris Hemsworth is going to get paid umpty-jillion dollars by Marvel for the next 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, he doesn't really, I mean, he might want to. I mean, maybe he might be a Trekkie, but they've got to bring something good to the table to get him in there.
Yeah. What do you think, David?
It's not something I follow except in a very, very peripheral sort of way. Mm-hmm. The ups and downs of contracts and who's being cast. You know, my attitude is just I hope it's a good actor. If it's continuity-wise, that would be very nice. But the brutal truth of the matter is, you know, we have passed the point where only one actor is associated with these roles. Mm-hmm. So, you know, for a while there, William Gillette was Sherlock Holmes, and no one could imagine anyone else playing the part. Well, that was a long time ago. And, you know, we're past the point of Bela Lugosi as the only Dracula. It's just, no, you know, and then when you start arguing that the second actor to play a role is the only one, it's just, that's not true. Negotiations will take place. We'll see what happens. That's outside my area of knowledge or control. I just hope the script is good. I hope they get a good actor. If it's Chris Pine, fine, he's a good actor. I'm willing to wait and see because I find myself when my expectations always of things like that, what are outside my control, always tinge the result. Whatever ends up with being as it tinges everything with disappointment if I have specific expectations.
So you're okay with there being another actor playing Kirk if it's not Chris Pine?
Sure. I understand totally why it's a good idea to have him come back. Mm-hmm. But it's a matter, you know, there's dozens and dozens of decisions going into that. Yeah. Most of which I am completely unaware of. All of them I'm almost completely unaware of in terms of any detail. Mm-hmm. So, if that's the way it goes, that's the way it goes. I am not upset.
No, I think that's a good outlook to have.
Mm-hmm. The thing is, though, I mean, I don't know. I'd feel kind of bad for the third guy to play Kirk because, I mean, Kirk is kind of the James Bond of space. You know, he always gets the girl. He's always got the cool gadgets. He's always got the suave one-liners. Mm-hmm. And we've had our Sean Connery, and we've had our Roger Moore, which means the next actor to play Kirk is going to be George Lazenby.
The other way around, where George Lazenby was the first one after.
Moore didn't get in before Lazenby?
No, Lazenby was the second.
I'm going to look this up.
Tells you how much I hated him. It's like I bumped him down to third automatically. Mm-hmm. See, because I thought...
Hey, we don't know. Yeah, the next one might be the Daniel Craig.
Yeah, I tell you what, Daniel Craig, that guy... It was, the second movie was the one that finally nailed it for me. Mm-hmm. I mean, he did good in the first one where they took him from a rough kind of thug and kind of sort of made him James Bond by the end. But that scene in the trailer for the second one where the train is exploding and he swings off a crane to land into the open gap in the train car where it just exploded. And then he lands and he stops to adjust his cufflinks because he's James Bond and you got to look good. I was like, okay, he's Bond. He's right. He's surpassed Roger Moore. He's up there Connery level Bond.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was convinced when I saw him being tortured in the first one.
I've
seen a Royale.
Yeah.
Because that was the way he did that was just amazing. Yes, the thing with the cufflinks and everything, that shows a certain level of style. But at that moment I saw just how incredibly tough this guy was. That what was being done to him, and then the person looked at us, "You're not going to break, are you?" And he laughs and says, No, I'm not.
Yeah. That was what made me respect him as an actor. I mean, that's like, okay, he's a really good actor, so maybe he can do the Bond thing. But it was the cufflink moment where it's like, he is. Yeah.
Well, shall we move on to the interview?
Yes. Welcome to the M Frontier, the 007 podcast. Sorry about that.
All right, David, are you ready?
Sure.
Okay, so question number 1. How did you first get into Star Trek?
When I was a wee child, I saw this commercial for a new show with a guy with pointed ears. And I was excited. And then my parents agreed to let me watch it, and they liked it too. So
you've been a fan ever since.
I'm a fan from when I was a wee child.
Very cool.
Way back in the 60s. And I was actually the sort of kid who eventually started writing down all the names of the planets and all the names of the races, particularly figuring out which ones are members of the Federation.
Oh. So you were probably one of the first people to have their own encyclopedia of Star Trek.
Yeah, kind of notebook full of little details. Yeah,
that's really cool.
Yeah, I was the other kind of fan. I would be like, okay, for a planet name, I just gotta come up with something that sounds vaguely Latin and then throw a number behind it.
Oh, sure, that works too.
We're traveling to Bellerophon 6.
Yeah, that's good. Hey, my first that I made up was, I think I called it Mandros. I'm going to Mandros 4. What the hell, what does that mean? Nothing. It just sounds...
So, is the original series your favorite then?
I would say it and DS9 are my favorites.
Ah. Discovery
is too young. It's only had its first season. Every single show, all series practically, their first season is their weakest, almost always. Because they haven't found itself yet. I really like what I've seen of Discovery, but let's see what the whole thing turns out to be.
Mm-hmm.
Let it get its legs under it. Then, but DS9 and the original series are the ones that are my favorites.
See, now that's that's kind of interesting to me. I mean, I could tell that you're not a I hate the new stuff kind of fan by the way you were talking about the new stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's a common reaction from folks who really have the original series as their favorite, because while it's been updated and made all glitzy and everything, the new stuff does try for that feel of the original, so I can see why you'd like it. And often when people say they love TOS, usually they say TNG is their next fit. Why DS9 is your number two? That's an interesting kind of.
It's the most because it's a wonderful blend of great characters, great dynamic characters, wonderful stories that don't pull their punch in the name of just formulaic. Let's a universal reset button at the end, and we don't delve into. The thing I disliked intensely about the Next Generation was, first of all, the technobabble. Second of all, the fact that the characters have no dynamic tension between them, or almost none, by Roddenberry's insistence. That it's always a universal reset button. There is no progression, with very, very little exceptions. The only character who, in my mind, really... Well, I think Picard and, to a lesser extent, and Data. Those two characters grew. The rest of the characters pretty much stayed who they were.
Yeah.
And they didn't change at all, no matter what happened.
That was one thing that always bugged me about Riker is every year he's offered command of a starship and he turns it down to stay as the XO.
They come up with some new excuse.
And it's after a while, why would they keep offering him starships? He should be done.
Yeah, after a while they just wouldn't. That's but at the same time, TNG had some amazing recurring characters, and it's like DS9 took their idea of really, really great recurring characters and made them regulars. Characters, like Barclay and Ensign Rowe from TNG, and suddenly you get into DS9, and you get these amazing regular characters who have a lot of interesting dynamics of things going on with them, including the fact that a whole bunch of them are not members of Starfleet. That's part of how they got away with it.
I did like what DS9 did to the last season of TNG, and it gave Ensign Rowe a fantastic finale arc. Yeah. And that's straight up because of what DS9 did is why Rowe's ending was as good as it was.
Yeah. That was... I have... said DS9, to me, it's just this... a captain who was not squeaky clean. I mean, someone must point out that Sisko is like the opposite of Jean-Luc Picard. And I liked Picard, but honestly, I would rather be under the command of Sisko. Because I think he would, I think in some really horrible situations, he would do what was necessary and, bring us out of it and achieve the higher objective no matter what. And the tendency in TNG is to find some kind of formulaic way to placate everything and make it kind of nice and end on a positive note, with very, very few exceptions. DS9 went with the idea, there really are some things in life that don't have anything like a neat solution. And so it delved into all that wonderfully. And to be honest, that is much more what the original series did. The original series had a fantastic dynamic and conflict with the regular characters. It was fascinating to watch them interplay with each other. The characters, to some extent, did grow. You could also see that they were also often dealing with situations for which there was no easy answer, or in things there was a degree of complexity and grayness, and yet at the same time a moral point of view that was firm and strong. I think those are the things that both DS9 and the original series have in common. And it's frankly the things that most of the other series tend to have only one or two of those things at most, whereas DS9 and TOS had them both, had them all in a very nice bundle. So, hey.
I like that you've introduced a new perspective to me on DS9 and TOS. That's pretty cool. That's getting me to think. Because I enjoy both. I really enjoy DS9. TNG is my favorite, but... I'm going to have to think about this. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite film?
Probably The Voyage Home.
What about The Voyage Home do you like?
Well, I find that when I thought about that, I was thinking, you know what? This is the one that doesn't have a villain.
Mm-hmm.
It just has a situation that has to be dealt with. And so it is about what the characters themselves do and how they try to do the right thing. So it's about them. At the same time, it's very entertaining. It is, the stakes are absolutely clear-cut and important. We understand them. And I loved lots and lots of little details. I loved seeing so many more starships and their officers, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I loved the fundamental mystery of the probe and its relationship to the whales. We never really solved that one. It was just there. It was just there. And we, hello, furry friend, hello.
That's Dixie saying hello. Give me a sec. Let me,
So yeah, but that, you know, it was so entertaining on so many levels. Every one of the characters pretty much got to do something. I liked how the characters interplayed. I liked the drama of the story, and I realized just structurally, because you are dealing with a relatively large cast for essentially 2 hours, that if you don't have a villain, then those characters, much more time is devoted to those characters simply trying to achieve whatever it is they need to achieve. And we don't need to waste time, in a way, working out, okay, who is this Romulan with the tattoos? Who's this guy that in the Romulan Empire who looks human and is on a huge ship that looks like a bat? Khan was cool, but I mean, ultimately, it was really a fun film, but it has not aged quite as well. Because fundamentally, the thing that impelled me the most was the story that was going on between our regulars. And Khan's kind of a limited villain. He's a good villain. But I think, I've come to the conclusion, although I love a good villain, for a Star Trek movie, for dealing with a cluster of regular characters like this properly, you kind of need to not have a villain. But, that was my conclusion when I realized why I like The Voyage Home best.
I think that's the first time I've heard someone say that, you know, pointing out there's no villain in The Voyage Home, and it gives the characters more time to, you know, or it gives us more time to get to know the characters. I think, again, that's another really interesting perspective that you have. So I'm like learning a lot from you just listening to what you're saying. It's getting me to think. That's
now
cool.
my head is swelling. I need a new hat again. Yes. But thank you.
Yeah. So let's move on talking about Chronicle. So what made you want to get into fan productions?
Oh, I mean, from early on, you know, you always want to know what's going on with the other ships. The fleet. You know, what would they be like? In the animated series, the shot of like the Enterprise with an Andorian first officer, it just gave a little thrill to me. I loved hearing about, like, you know, even in the original series, I loved hearing about the Constellation or the Essex and the Defiant. You know, the other ships. What was going on in the fleet. As an interesting little touch is also I grew up in Pensacola, Florida, and the last Essex-class aircraft carrier from World War II is stationed there, which was the USS Lexington. And so in the Ultimate Computer, the Starship Lexington sort of always kind of resonated in my head for that very reason. I later graduated high school aboard the Lexington. But
wow.
Yeah, but also I am a storyteller. I've always had that yearning for writing. I am now a published and produced playwright. Yes, one of these, I have 2 space opera kind of plays simmering in the back of my subconscious. They're very different universes, but still. So I tried numerous types of writing. I tried to write prose. I tried to write screenplays. One reason or another, it just comes down to I realized ultimately I'm a playwright. So that's one reason why I'm not writing Chronicle as fan fiction. I'm writing it as a script. But to actually but yes, it's just a matter of almost every fictional universe that I've kind of fallen in love with, I can make up my own characters and my own stories. You know, I have indeed a Sith Lord in my imagination, and I know exactly who he is, where he came from, his backstory, and how he would fit. And I have I know a whole idea of what was going on with the Collins family and Dark Shadows. I have a very, very interesting character in mind who is part of the Harry Potter universe. All this sort of thing. I have dreamed up a house with a sigil and everything for Game of Thrones. So of course I made up things for Star Trek.
And this led you into Chronicle.
Yeah.
So what can you tell us about it?
Okay. It's an easier question if you could. It's easier to ask that question if you ask a specific question, because there's a huge amount I could tell you about.
Okay.
All right,
Go ahead,
so
Bill.
I looked over the press release,
Mm-hmm.
and the gist of the plot is the starship in question is the Witch of Endor.
Yes.
First, I have to ask, did you really like those Disney Ewok movies?
No. But I love the Horatio Hornblower novels, and one of the ships in the Horatio Hornblower novels is the HMS Witch of Endor, who is a character in the Book of Samuel in the Bible.
Okay. So that wasn't the Witch of Endor from the Ewok movie?
Nope.
Okay. Sorry about calling you a Star Wars fan earlier, then. I apologize.
I am a Star Wars fan.
Okay,
I'm also
okay.
a Star Trek fan and a Harry Potter fan.
So Chronicle is the story of this starship, the Witch of Endor, exploring a heretofore not very well known region of the galaxy.
Yeah.
And coming across a situation where the Federation has a bad standing because of the actions of a starship 100 years prior, the USS Chronicle.
Not 100 years. Not quite 50 years.
Okay. And so the crew of the Witch of Endor is trying to deal with a crisis that was started 50 years ago, patch up the Federation's reputation, and figure out what actually happened to the Chronicle. That's the general plot, right?
Not quite.
Okay.
Well, first of all, they know what happened to the Chronicle.
Oh, okay.
Or they can. The event was actually intensely embarrassing to Starfleet on many levels, and it was just before the Dominion War. So they kind of, as much as possible, swept the events under the carpet and let it get lost. The information is there, and our regulars do find out, and eventually everybody finds out. The situation is that the consequences of what the captain and crew of the Chronicle did are coming back to bite the Federation in some tender part of their anatomy. it's putting the Federation at this point, which is about 30 years after the Dominion War. It is 35, 40 years later. It's putting the Federation from the position that they were in. They were feeling fantastic at this point. Federation is feeling we are entering into our golden age. We are the city on the hill. We are the match of anything. We are so. The Federation has proven itself. We are so much. The shining light of the future. They're feeling fantastic, and they're feeling like they are the epitome of what they want their civilization to be, and they figure pretty much anyone who's not horrible or benighted or just less progressive than they are will understand that. So as they move into to explore the Perseus Arm, they think they're going to be finding lots of allies and friends, and they find someone who's more progressive than they are, and larger, much more wealthy, much, much larger, older, and they view the Federation as a bunch of narrow-minded fanatics.
I like that idea. I really do. I've always been a firm believer the Federation needs a good kick in its complacency.
And that's what happens. And the thing is, they're coming up against someone. The comparison is, someone thinks that I'm the big guy on the block, and they suddenly find out that they're so wonderful, they're so powerful, and then they suddenly discover that they are a minor power compared to someone else. They have a point, and these guys have a point, because, and it's one thing, imagine that you go out into the world and thinking that you are going to be seen the way there was a certain period where, for example, the Americans tended to think of themselves in pretty much that way. And there was a large chunk of the world kind of agreed that the United States was this shining city on a hill. But what if, in this case, the Federation has that viewpoint? They step forward and they find out a much older, much larger, more powerful civilization than themselves looks as we looked upon South Africa during apartheid, or they look upon the way we look upon Iran as a repressive regime that must be isolated, countered, and so this starts, in effect, a storm, basically an ethical / political / social storm. And trying to deal with this as it has happened, we have these four characters who end up at the eye of that storm, and they're going to have an impact on how this all will turn out.
What can you tell us about those characters?
Well, there are four. One male, three female. One of them is a Vulcan named Vanel. She is from a very old Vulcan colony called Fadofar. And the planet, that colony, predates the time of awakening. And it's also nothing like Vulcan. It's mostly oceanic, temperate, and lots of pretty forested islands. So it's nothing like Vulcan at all.
Now, question for you. You said the name of her home planet was Fagofar?
Fadofar.
And that's far as in Ponfar? Is this the Vulcan version of Pleasure Planet?
It means, I'm assuming in the oldest Vulcan, the trait was, means basically gigantic garden.
Okay.
And people from it are generally called Fadufara. And so she is from there, and her grandfather was she was raised by her grandfather because her parents were archaeologists who were always going off somewhere. So she was raised by her grandfather. Her grandfather was a former Starfleet officer who was a hero of the Dominion War. And he, by the way, was an officer aboard the USS Chronicle.
Okay.
Now, the other three officers, one of them is Lieutenant Zachary Stiles. Let's test your Trek trivia. Do you recognize the name Stiles?
The very same Stiles. He was captain the Excelsior.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And also the if you recall, the navigator in Balance of Terror was also named Stiles. It's supposed to be an old Starfleet family.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
The Stiles, they fought in the Earth Romulan War.
Mm-hmm. And basically have been through all fan fiction and novels and stuff have used that family a lot. So I'm saying that Zachary Stiles, his father was in Starfleet, so was his aunt and his grandparents. Yes, he's a young lieutenant. He fully expects to be a captain one day. And he is very, very sharp, but he also is young enough that he really hasn't had his identity tested yet.
Now, is he going to have some of the same kind of conceited smugness that his ancestor was known for, or
he's not?
Is he a nice guy?
He's a nice guy.
Okay.
But he's very much he's got a bit of for a variety of reasons. He kind of almost, and this is a subtle piece of vanity rather than arrogance on his part, is he tends to see himself as the embodiment of what the Federation is, because he's of mixed race, and his mother was an enemy of the Federation. So, and yet, she defected. She fell in love with a Starfleet officer, and now he is, and he is, an upcoming Starfleet officer. And he says, "Isn't this exactly what the Federation is all about? One day, all our enemies will be our friends, our allies. One day they will join us." And because that's the idea, he's a great guy. He has this, but he has some blinders on. And, they're going to get knocked off. So that's his story. But then there's also there's a medical doctor who's a Bajoran, and she is a smartass. And she is someone who she is very she's quite idealistic in her own way, but she's also quite sarcastic. And she does not have rose-colored glasses on when it comes to the Federation or Starfleet, although she generally views them as good things. She chose to enter, the Starfleet service and all this. And her main thing is she really does like to help people. That's why she's a doctor. But she is very, very, in her own way, very sarcastic, very, very sharp-tongued. And for example, she's not averse to getting into a fight. In fact, if she wasn't such a good doctor, she would be assigned to this ship because she has some disciplinary things on her record for getting into bar fights.
Good thing she's a doctor. She can patch them all up afterwards.
Yeah, and she's a very good doctor. And one of the things is like someone in the very first episode is says, so I understand you just got in a bar fight with a bunch of Cardassian cadets. What if you have to serve with some Cardassians? She said, I'm just trying to test people. I should have been a bit more careful, but, I think people need to have, what are you going to do when someone's rude to you? You have to be able to grow up and deal with it. So, and he's not completely satisfied with that answer, but never mind. But anyway, She and Lieutenant Stiles have been serving together on the same ship before they're transferred to the Witch of Endor. The other two have just graduated from the academy, and that's the Vulcan Vanel, and then there is Athena Azarian, who was her roommate, and she is from an Earth colony, and a colony that really doesn't want to have that much to do with the Federation. It's not that they're opposed to the Federation or anything. They're just kind of a little bit reclusive. And they're not really happy. She's the only person from her planet at the moment who has joined Starfleet. And she's having done that, she was a little bit burning her bridges behind her. But given the field she was fascinated by, there was very little for her to do in her home. She's an exobiologist. She studies alien life. And her world is being terraformed. That's the absolute opposite of what she wants to be. That's, tailoring things for this planet. And that's totally not what gathered her passion at all. So it's a little bit more complex than that. But she is very, very sharp. Like, she'd be an excellent chess player. She and Vanel actually met because they're both members of the fencing club at Starfleet Academy. And they're very good friends, although the dynamic of the human and the Vulcan is turned around. She's the scientist. Vanel is a security expert. She thinks much more in terms of tactics and winning and history and that sort of thing. So if one of them becomes a captain, it's going to be Vanel. And it's very likely that, she'd want Athena as her science officer. So it's the opposite, in a way, of the spot. Yes.
Is that like foreshadowing that she's going to become a captain?
Not in this story. She's just an ensign.
Yeah, see, that was going to be my follow-up question, too. I mean, I know you say your four main characters are junior officers, and I remember Discovery was talking about how it was going to be about the junior officers, but it's basically a couple of junior officers who are rubbing shoulders with the senior staff and taking care of the big issues with the captain and everything predominantly featured in the show. So is there going to be some kind of crisis that pushes them into that command position where they're running the ship, or is this really going to be closer to the kind of feel that the TNG episode The Lower Decks gave us?
Neither. The fact of the matter is they're all very promising officers in a ship that actually has a somewhat smaller crew complement than you would think, because the ship needed an enormous amount of technology crammed into it. Because it has a working slipstream drive. But basically needs a dedicated computer core. Totally just to keep that operating, and then has to be reset takes 48 hours after they use it for a few hours. And they have to reset the entire major dedicated computer core. So the whole thing is crammed full of more technology than a ship usually would. So it gives anyone in the crew more an opportunity to step forward. And what is happening is these four, who basically know each other, become like the away team of choice. And then, because they are the ones on the ground with certain situations, then they become even more so. They have become the ones who have the actual experience with the people, the cultures involved here. Therefore, their advice is called upon, because they're the ones who are on the field.
Is there going to be some kind of explanation for why this ship is actually building smart away teams consisting of junior officers rather than always sending down the command staff on away missions?
My thought, although I wasn't going to specifically deal with it, is that since it's taking place like 30 years later, this is just a shift in Starfleet methodology.
Okay.
So I wanted to ask you about how you're going to release this stuff. In your press release, you say initially it will appear in three forms: artwork on Pinterest, DeviantArt, and then some Facebook groups, and then also as scripts published in some fan fiction forums, and then as a series of small audio dramas.
Yeah.
So what do you have a plan of how you're going to do that? Like, what are you going to release first? Do you have other avenues of release? What are you thinking?
The artwork has already started to be released on DeviantArt and Pinterest. The artwork that I've created. And there's also, I commissioned someone to do a design of the Visionary class, which is the Witch of Endor. 3 of these ships are sent into the Perseus Arm at the very beginning, which is the Witch of Endor, the Cassandra, and the Merlin. So they are far away from Starfleet. They're pretty much on their own. So they have to deal with the situation as best they can.
Now, is there a significance to those names beyond simply sounding cool? I mean, Cassandra saw the future, according to the old myths. Merlin lived backwards, so he knew the future because he'd already lived it. And the Witch of Endor, usually witches like that are used as oracles or whatnot. So is there some kind of...
Yeah, she was.
So is that like an intentional choice that this is...
Yes. The Visionary class of ships are deep space exploration vessels. And they're basically, they're the test bed for this version of the Slipstream drive to do deep space exploration. There are 9 planned, and the idea is that they will be named after seers, soothsayers, prophets. The other names in the series would include Zarathustra, Tiresias. Probably one of them will be called either Freya or the Norn. I haven't decided on all of them yet. But these will be seers, soothsayers. One of them may be called the Oracle of Delphi. Or Pythia would be more accurate for that one. Or whatever. It's... But yes, there is a nomenclature for this style of vessel, this class. The audio dramas, just return here. Once the scripts are done, the scripts will vary between 6 and 12 minutes as audio dramas. Then once they're done, I start getting voice talent to record their parts and then edit it all together. I'm a pretty good sound editor, and I have someone very experienced Star Trek sound editor for fan films and stuff who's willing to help out. And then that will be put all together. And the idea eventually will be probably to release the individual episodes once a week until the story is played out.
How many episodes are you going for?
I don't know yet.
Now, are you planning on setting up a Facebook page or something else where you consolidate links and you have the whole thing laid out in one spot for those of us who are bad at checking Pinterest?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. There will be when the time comes, there will be a Facebook page, and it will have links to everything. And you'll be able to do all that, and and I hope people will enjoy it.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's it's to explain, the stories are actually going to be designed in a series of mini arcs, so that almost as if the individual episodes are acts in episodes, and each arc is kind of an episode, and that's very, very, very general. But, for example, the first arc that I'm working on right now is about something that happens just prior to these 4 people actually arriving on the Witch of Endor. That is a setup, and it's setting up mysteries and situation, getting to know the characters. And then after that will be the initial mission of the Witch of Endor going to the Perseus arm, and what initially happens when they get there. So,
Bill, do you have any further questions?
hello?
Uh-oh, what happened to Bill?
I don't know.
Yeah, no, I'm here.
Oh, okay.
Technical issue. I didn't leave.
Okay.
No, I think that covers most of what I was curious about. I mean, the press release, we'll have to include a link to that so that folks can see it, if it's for general release.
Yeah, do you want it released?
I don't mind it being released. It's just letting people know that, it's still very much a work in progress. This is not going to... I don't think we will actually have anything up until the new year.
Okay.
Because I have to write the scripts. I have to recruit the voice talent.
Mm-hmm.
Several people, I'm happy to say, in fan film world have expressed interest in being voice talent. I know at least one of the characters, one of the small recurring characters, I'm going to provide the voice for. There's also, I should say, we have the 4 regular characters, and there are a series of recurring characters. And, very early you say, what would I like everybody to know? I would like to let you and everybody know that, for example, one Federation race that will become somewhat important in terms of this story is the Tellarites. Because I think... Yes?
That's something I would look forward to seeing more of. I mean, it would be nice to get another of the founding races really fleshed out more than they have been.
Yeah. The thing is, when you start going into beta canon, what's sort of been accepted is what the Tellarites are all about. Then you start going, oh, these are interesting. These are interesting people. So the first officer of the Witch of Endor is a Tellarite.
Oh, very cool. I've always been bothered by the Tellarites the way they've been portrayed in the show, because it seems like everything about the Tellarites was based on one line from Sarek, and I'm not sure if he was being literal or he was just being snarky about the Tellarites just love to argue just for the sake of arguing, and I think it's like the lore developed that into being a literal thing and not just Sarek being a smart aleck.
Well, I'm going to go with that lore thing because, it's built on something, and it is an interesting idea. The idea that these are folks who think every single idea deserves to be re-examined. And isn't that exactly maybe what is needed for the Federation in this situation?
So that part I definitely agree with. I'm loving the idea of tearing down the Federation's utopian propaganda.
Well, it's not because it's not the Federation is bad people. It's just they have a few glaring flaws and blind spots.
Yeah, that was one thing that's always bothered me. It happens a lot in like TNG and afterwards. There's usually some variation of the line. Yes, our culture used to be like yours, but then we evolved. And that whole attitude, I've always despised that. It's like, that is not what the Federation should be. You tell yourself you're all tolerant, but no, you're not evolved as we are.
And anyone who's better than they are on another level of reality.
Yeah.
They're gods, really.
Yeah.
But now we're going to meet like a bunch of people who are very much on the same level as the Federation. They've got trade, they've got ordinary ships, they're just people. But their attitudes, they look at the Federation, they go, yeah, we never did that.
So let's begin to wrap it up, and let's go. Bill, do you have a lightning round of questions?
Actually, not this time. I got so wrapped up into coming up. I came up with so many good questions about Chronicle because it's like this is an interesting project. But all right, let me see what I can do. going across our entire crazy smorgasbord of everything we've discussed, which, all right, let's since you're going to do some stuff with the Tellarites and you've been thinking about them, which DS9 character would have been better if they'd have been a Tellarite?
O'Brien.
All right. Which was your favorite of the James Bonds?
Daniel Craig.
All right. I've got to come up with some more. Son of a gun.
On the spot. It's Bill's lightning round for Bill.
Since you're doing a little deconstruction of the Federation, which of the various blind spots or character flaws do you see as the Federation's biggest flaw, personally? Which one do you really just get on your nerves?
The Prime Directive.
I like this guy. I really do. I'm just going to... Okay, I only came up with 3 instead of 5, but you know what? It's like... Usually for these, there are no wrong answers, but this time there actually were right answers, and you really just nailed all the right answers. I mean, you're getting 5 for 5, and you only had to answer 3 questions. I like this guy.
Be fair. 2 more.
All right. 2 more questions. Blue is Dutch in origin. MacDowell is Irish in origin.
Scots.
It's Scottish. I'm sorry. So you're Scots-Dutch. So whose cuisine do you prefer?
Italian.
You just love causing problems.
I'll tell you why. Have you ever had, other than like chocolate or Scotch, have you ever had Scottish and Dutch cuisine?
I've had some haggis, and once you set aside what it is, I mean, it's very tasty and interesting. You just gotta not think about, oh, it's the icky parts of the pig or the cow or the sheep, and I really hope that's a sheep. I'm more of a gourmand than a gourmet, so I'll eat just about anything. But I do see your point. Yeah. All right, last question, and this is for all the marbles. Since you're naming all these people after famous seers and oracles, who do you like more, Nostradamus or Edgar Cayce?
Nostradamus. He's a more entertaining character from history. Edgar Cayce just sold a bunch of books.
Yeah, he's a little... I don't know, Edgar Cayce, man, he always struck me as a little bit odd. It's like, I've seen the future, but I've seen it 5,000 years from now, so none of my predictions are really relevant for what's going to happen in history. Just believe me, that's
Nostradamus is so vague and poetic. Yeah. Huh? Yes.
Personal friend of mine had a theory that said all of Nostradamus' visions were of the San Diego Zoo. So that whole thing, the lion and the bear lay siege to the gazelle. That wasn't like the bear wasn't Russia and the lion wasn't England. That was an actual lion and bear, and the dude was seeing an escapee at the zoo.
So I totally forgot to do the question of the week, the trivia question.
All right.
So let's move to that.
Yeah.
When you said slipstream drive, it totally reminded me of my question. So which alien race developed quantum slipstream drive technology? Was it species 116, species 5618, the Kazon, or the Bolians? What do we think?
It has to be one of the first 2 because the Kazon and the Bolians do not have slipstream drive. The people who had one survivor introduced the slipstream drive with the false ship USS Dauntless.
This guy's good.
Yeah.
I don't remember the designation of his race.
And there were those other dudes who the entire species went into cryogenic suspension for 500 years. And they were the ones who invented the entire transwarp network that the Borg took over.
Okay.
Which is kind of like Slipstream, but not. So I don't know if one of those numbers is your guy who was the sole survivor, and knowing how Adam does these questions, the other one is the transwarp network folks.
You know, I wish I had done that. That would be really cool. I didn't actually do that. So it's species 116. I didn't even say the letters. Awkward. So species 116 was that sole survivor that David was talking about. It comes from Voyager's season 4, 26th episode, Hope and Fear. That's the Borg oh my goodness, I can't say words today. The Borg designation, species 116. Mm-hmm. Species 5618 is actually the Borg designation for humans.
Okay.
Okay.
So there you go. And the Kazon, I thought, well, we're talking about Voyager, and you throw in the Kazon. And then the Bullions, I just think the Bullions are hilarious, so I just threw that in. So here's a bonus question. Sure. What's the name of the episode where Voyager used the slipstream drive but ended up crashing to the planet?
I don't know.
That one was called This Is Why Harry Kim Will Never Be Promoted Past Ensign.
There you go. I couldn't really think of a bonus question, so I happened to watch the episode a couple weeks ago, and it's one of my favorite. It's Timeless, Season 5, Episode 6. Yeah, so...
That's a good episode, yeah.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
Yeah. By the way, I carefully looked at, I didn't particularly pay attention to the title, but since the Witch of Endor and her sister ships have a slipstream drive, what in effect, this is how detailed I got. The problem with the slipstream drive is it's insane. It maintains, you have to keep track of an insane number of factors. That was the problem that destroyed the Voyager the first time.
Yeah.
Why they had to have, the shuttle in front. The idea is that's why the Visionary class has a dedicated computer core that is solely devoted to doing all the necessary calculations and such for slipstream drive. And this is a slipstream drive that's been toned down as much as they possibly can to make it basically as slow as they can make it. So I actually did some checking. What it does is it lets the ship reach, according to the old warp scale, the original series, it reaches warp 56 for a certain number of hours, and then you've got to shut it off. You're just begging for trouble. At that point, the whole system can't handle it anymore. Then you have to completely reset the computer core, which takes 48 hours.
Go ahead.
So this is why so much of the ship is crammed with the technology to do all this. The Perseus arm is approximately 5,000 light years from the Orion arm, which is what we are in, which is where the Federation, the Romulans, the Klingons are all there in this little, actually it's a pithy little small sub-arm called the Orion arm. The Perseus arm is much larger, but it's about 5,000 light years away. And so, Voyager would take a few years to cross that. And the whole thing was they were trying to figure out a way, how could we cross that thing in a few weeks? And that's what the Visionary class does. And so this is their, the next big journey. So that's
oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to ask if you've read any of the novels that continue Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and TNG.
No, I'll tell you why. I became very frustrated because I find, and this sort of gets into also a philosophy of writing. I think the characters and the method of storytelling for Star Trek doesn't usually particularly lend itself towards a literary medium. I'm not saying you can't write fiction, prose. I'm saying that you have to alter it in a way that maybe you'll end up with it not really feeling very much like Star Trek at all. And if the result, most of the fan fiction I have, not fan fiction, but the official novels that I've read, fall into several traps that I see in a lot of space opera novels, and particularly the works of David Weber, of throwing in so many damn characters that don't really mean anything. You don't need to know that this person is a Bolian. You don't need to know very much about this character at all. There's a data dump approach to so much of it, including characters, the character development. The result has been that also the fiction that since the focus generally remains on characters we got to know in a different medium, it seems translating dramatic characters, and dramatic I mean in terms of the medium, that is to say film, plays, TV series, those a dramatized form of medium into a literary, i.e. a read form of medium, seems evidently to be more difficult to do successfully than the other way around. Because you can adapt, many novels have been successfully adapted into a dramatic medium. I'm very hard-pressed to think of very many times a dramatic medium has been successfully adapted into a literary medium. And there are problems that pop up, is that, people, maybe it's because people see things so differently. I'm not sure, the problem could be in the reader/audience member. That I've increasingly, when I read Star Trek books, I just don't see these characters are behaving in a way these characters seem to me would, is my feel of them.
Yeah.
I just don't see it, and so many of them behave. Frankly, so many of them that I started reading seemed to me were poorly written, or were just going off on some bizarre tangent instead of just telling a good story in the medium in which it exists. They weren't good books. They weren't good novels, and with some exceptions. Course, and this was my experience to the point where I just stopped reading, and because there were other books I'd rather read. Therefore, there's a whole bunch I can't judge, of course, because I haven't read a whole bunch of them. So I'm just talking about the small fistful that I read and my reaction to them that made me stop, and therefore I cannot judge anything that I didn't read.
Well, I was going to say. The reason why I bring it up is in those books they have the Vesta class vessels, and one of them, the USS Aventine, is captained by Ezri Dax, and it has a slipstream drive.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Also, the ships in Star Trek Online.
Yeah.
But by definition, Chronicle is its own side canon.
Does it follow Star Trek Online?
No.
Okay.
It only follows what we have seen on screen.
Okay, because in your press release you cite Star Trek Online, so I was just wondering.
I believe I worded it in such a way that it was somewhat inspired.
Okay.
I think, if not, I may have it in that. I certainly am following certain things. For example, I accept the canonicity of the J.J. Abrams films. Mm-hmm. It's a side timeline, but therefore I say, okay, the Hobus supernova happened.
Yeah. Romulus is gone. Yeah.
Romulus and Remus are gone, and what's one of the things I had to work out was, what? Well, this is one of the reasons the Federation feels so much like oh, what a great guy am I. Is they have no more really rivals. Mm-hmm. As I look at it, the Klingon Empire bled itself white by fighting a series of wars. They fought Cardassia, then they fought the Federation, then they fought the Dominion. And that just must have bled themselves white. The Cardassians, of course, were just about at the stage became the stage where Germany was at the end of World War II. And the Romulan Star Empire, of course, just kind of, the comparison I have there is Game of Thrones. Basically, the doom of Valeria came to Romulus. And so it's So, I'm imagining that Romulan Star Empire is fractured. It's been a few decades. So they've had, they are kind of stabilized into 3 factions that aren't getting along very well and are sort of in that weird situation, which is dealt with. It's mentioned of what's going on with there. Mm-hmm. But therefore, who is the Federation's rival at this point? The Federation the Federation is gigantic. The Federation has a huge economy, and it's actually getting along with almost everybody in their immediate vicinity that we know of, except for some entities that definitely don't take much apart. And they've seen, as far as we can see, they defeated the Borg. So they have, for the last 30 years, 30 years, they've been feeling pretty good about themselves. And so and that's part of what I was looking at. And I was saying, okay, let's look at this, what might have happened. Mm-hmm. I said, well, this dovetails into a certain idea I had. And then, it was like I had a dozen different ideas, and several of them just dovetailed together with this. And as I became increasingly aware, first the Abrams movies and then Discovery, the amount of interest in Star Trek was just increasing. Mm-hmm. And when I realized the option existed of making audio dramas, which just saves so much time on sets, costumes, and makeup. Mm-hmm. So that's what I started to do there. But I mean, I was willing to look at the soft canon of things like Star Trek Online and the novels, and saying I'm willing to use that as a suggestion. Like I've heard of the Aventine novels, I've read some synopses and stuff, but they didn't interest me. Although I thought, oh, that's kind of cool. Except, why is a psychologist captaining a warship? That when she was the one good counselor we ever saw on Star Trek, and she left the job. That's sad. She was so good at it.
Well, I liked the books. I haven't read them for the last couple of years, but I enjoyed where they went, and not all of them were that great. But it's an interesting storyline, I think. Anyway,
from what I've seen, it seemed like an interesting storyline. I mean, I liked Ezri Dax very, very much. I thought she was a wonderful character, and but yeah, I am saying things. Wow, yeah. One thing is, wow, someone who's a counselor and knows what they're doing. I've been in therapy, so let me tell you something. Deanna Troy's incompetent at her job.
See, I think that goes back to that thing about Picard being crazy. The reason why Troy looks competent, all of her telepathic, empathic abilities are holding Picard's brain together.
Okay, now that is a fun piece of side canon. Absolutely, that is a fun idea. One of the things, it's so much fun these days because the internet is growing so much, is you get to find so many fun little fan ideas and theories. There's a YouTube fellow who is generally kind of infuriating in some ways, but at other times he's very insightful. And he had a simple explanation for why the warp thing and everything changed between the original series and the Next Generation. And he said, well, we were never told transwarp didn't work. His idea was, no, transwarp worked. All the ships we see in the Next Generation are using transwarp. That's why they're using a different warp scale. It's just it's not the transwarp conduits.
Right.
It's a change in terminology. There was something big that happened in terms of the ships then. That's why the ships are so much faster. But it was called Transwarp for a while, and now it's just called Warp, and now we call something else Transwarp.
I like that.
Yeah, I thought that was brilliant. I thought that was kind of, and I was posting that's completely. I think that's great. Yeah. So, yeah, and so that's what's going on. But that's again, this is the sort of thing because a fictional universe fascinates me. That's why more and more I wanted to dive into one, and Star Trek ultimately seemed to be the one I could do. I thought it would be a lot of fun.
Well, Chronicle sounds like a fun. It's going to be like a fun story, and
So.
we look forward to it. So how about we wrap up here?
Okay. Yeah, I flap my jaw so long. If you give me half a chance.
All right, Bill, take us away.
All right, I'll take us away, but I want to give our guest a chance to think of a catchphrase to steal for the end as we do this. That way I don't have to think of one because I'm running out of catchphrases.
Oh.
Anyway.
Some kind of catchphrase for the episode?
For our sign-off, yeah.
Yeah, we don't have a catchphrase, so we steal them from other franchises.
Oh, okay. So, alrighty then.
So there you go. Alrighty then.
That'll work, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we will. Alrighty then.
All right, Bill.
And that's our show for today, folks. I'd like to thank our special guest, David MacDowell Blue, for telling us all about Chronicle and answering all the questions right.
Except the one I said I didn't know.
Yeah. And thank you, Adam, once again, for giving us another great episode.
Oh, of course. It is my pleasure as always.
And I am Bill Allen, a.k.a. the guy in the red shirt, and this has been The Final Frontier. Like and follow us on Facebook, check us out in the iTunes Store, download us on Google Play, and I believe we have a link or two up on TrekSphere.com as well, don't we?
Yeah.
All right. And we'll see you next week. Catchphrase.
Alrighty then.